each of them. Chris is chopped up by a boat propeller. His girlfriend Katie breaks the thermometer on herself and then trips and falls on some sharp skeleton bones. Gino crashes through a glass-bottom boat while scuba diving. Drina tries to leave Cancun, but falls off the jet bridge after it's struck by a runaway forklift. Jeremy falls down during this and also dies. They're unable to leave the country with an incoming hurricane. Amanda drowns when the automatic pool cover turns on while she's swimming underwater. Matt's abs are not strong enough to stand up to fireworks. Jake is chopped up by a rescue helicopter. Ryan tries to hide from the hurricane in a coffin, but he never manages to make it out. And Carly, well, I'm not sure what exactly happens to her. She sees this creepy shaman in the mirror, and then she just kinda disappears. I don't know. Dust in the wind, I guess. After soaking up the sun in Cancun, Death returns to New York, still needing to take care of that second list, and see if anything can be done about the Hermit's clear rivers. But before doing that, there are a couple more disasters with unintended survivors. One involved a 38-year-old Doris Fenwick, who was saved from drowning. Her fate after that is unknown, but we can assume that death comes for her. The other is a larger incident that becomes known as the infamous Lakeview Fire. We don't know if it was a premonition that caused some of the victims to survive this time, but given the track record of the series, it probably was. All of the survivors passed away in what is described as an eerie string of deaths, but one of the last survivors was a teenager named Brian Gibbons. However, before taking out Brian, Death decides that now is a good time to try to reclaim the lives of Evan, Tim, Nora, Kat, Rory, Eugene, Clear, and Thomas. Clear is still in the padded room though, so she's off the board for now. So Death's new plan is to take out all of the others in a massive highway pileup. I'll also note that the order that they were going to die in the pileup doesn't match up with the order in which they were interfered with by the would-be Flight 180 victims, because that order isn't necessarily the order that they would have died in. If that explanation sounds confusing, think about it like this. Burke could have gotten shot in that shootout, but not died from his injuries for another couple days. We don't know, because we don't see any of that. What I'm trying to say is don't worry too much about the order here. Death's designs are thwarted once again by William Bloodworth, who seems to somehow make contact with a young woman named Kimberly Corman, just before her very own Flight 180 style premonition. Kimberly's vision not only saves those who were on that second death list, but also herself, leading her to basically be added to that list. Also, Death starts working backwards at this point. So the last one that should have died in the Route 23 pileup, Kimberly, is now the first target. Why does Death decide to go in reverse here? Well, this is twice that this set of victims has gotten away, so it might be to try to catch them off guard. Flight 180 has become kind of a mainstream story at this point, and maybe Death is worried that its victims are figuring out its MO. Death comes for Kimberly immediately in the form of a barreling truck, but Officer Burke pulls her out of the way, so her spot is skipped for now. Evan is crushed by a ladder, Tim is crushed by a glass pane, and Nora is decapitated by an elevator. Eugene tries to just give up and take himself out, but he's physically unable to do so because it isn't his turn, as explained by Clear, who is now helping the new victims. I'm not really a fan of this rule, but it doesn't matter. This is how it is. You literally cannot die until Death has decided that it's your turn. And it's Kat's turn. Her airbag goes off, sending her head into a sharp pipe. Rory actually encounters the Lakeview Fire survivor Brian Gibbons and saves him from being hit by a news vent, thus extending his life a little bit longer. Then we see the importance of Death taking them out in the correct order again, because it actually knocks down a tree branch in order to move Burke out of the way so he isn't hit by the barbed wire fence that slices through Rory. Next up is Eugene, who is taken out in an explosion that also incinerates Clear. Now you might ask why Clear was able to die right here if it isn't her turn. I think it's because she's technically still on the Flight 180 list, not the Route 23 list. So on that list, it's been her turn the entire time. She's the last one. With a last-ditch plan, Kimberly decides to drive into a lake, hoping that because she's next to the hospital, she would be treated quickly and someone would be able to revive her. This would theoretically invalidate Death's list according to what she was told by Bloodworth, and her and Burke would be saved. This is the second theory proposed by Bloodworth. This one actually has a little bit more going for it because now we've seen Patty Fuller's grandmother, Patty Fuller herself, Louise King, and now Kimberly Corman all survive using this tactic. It's possible that they all died shortly after, but none of them are confirmed dead. In fact, Kimberly and Burke reunite with the Gibbons family for a barbecue at the end of that summer in 2001, and the grill explodes on Brian, thus wrapping up the list of victims from the Lakeview fire. It would be a couple more years until Death would have to start another list. I mean, obviously, this kind of stuff is probably always happening off screen, fine, but the next Final Destination story would be Final Destination: Death of the Senses, taking place in 2003, a few years after Flight 180. Jack Curtis was the driver of the bus that ran over Terry Chaney in 2000. You know, the one that Kat was also on. He would lose his job because of this and become homeless, and it is because he is homeless that he's in the right place at the right time to save a police officer named Amy Tom from a serial killer. That means all the victims that the serial killer would have gotten are now saved, so Death has to take out each one of them. The serial killer is referred to as John Doe, and yes, he's very similar to the John Doe from Se7nen. But instead of basing his crimes on the 7 deadly sins, he planned to base them on the 5 senses. For sights, he was to take out a beautiful reporter named Chelsea Cox. Death gets her with an icicle, on the air.
We'll do it live!
For smell, the target was the man in charge of municipal trash collection, Dawson Donahue. His car explodes. Taste was going to be food critic Dominique Swan. Death blows up her wine bottle and she's choked by a glass shard. Touch would have been Katie Aston, a talk show host and televangelist who was electrocuted. And for sound, the victim would have been Joshua Cornell III, a rapper-producer whose head is cut off when his platinum record is launched through the air during an equipment malfunction. Of course, there is one more, and that is the officer that Jack saved, Amy Tom. She is impaled by her own art piece, and then Jack also dies, even though he wasn't technically on the list, because Officer Tom's partner thought that he was the killer. Oopsie. On May 13th, 2005, the 5-year anniversary of Flight 180 and the 4-year anniversary of the Route 23 pileup, there are 2 more psychic visions. I would definitely understand if this is becoming one of Death's least favorite days of the year. The first is in Miami during Final Destination: Looks Could Kill. A woman named Stephanie Pulaski, also known as Sherry, is part of a modeling group called Cellar, where each model is named after a different type of wine. During a party on a yacht called the Coral Clipper, Sherry has a vision of a fatal crash, and she convinces her boyfriend and some of the other models to exit the boat before it departs. When the crash occurs for real, a flying piece of debris strikes Sherry in the face, sending her into a coma. While she is being hospitalized, a similar disaster would occur further up the Atlantic coast during a special grad night in McKinley Park. That night in McKinley, Pennsylvania, a yearbook photographer named Wendy Christensen has a horrific vision about an accident on a roller coaster called Devil's Flight. She causes a scene and several other high school students get off the ride before it crashes, but Wendy loses her boyfriend and her best friend because their car's restraints were not released. Wendy sees the ominous signs of death in her photographs from that night and tries to figure out their meaning so that she can warn each of the others before they are crossed off of Death's newest checklist. Popular girls Ashley Freund and Ashlyn Halperin both become victims of a tanning bed incident. Perverts Frankie Cheeks becomes a motorhead, and not in the heavy metal kind of way, and football star Luis Romero is all bronze and no brain, literally because his head is crushed by a pair of giant weights. Wendy and her friend Kevin Fisher are able to prevent the death of Ian McKinley, so the next target is his girlfriend, Erin, who is spiked by a nail gun. Wendy's sister Julie was also on the ride, and with the help of Kevin, Wendy's able to rescue her. But her friend Perry is not so lucky and gets impaled by a flagpole. Wendy and Kevin are both able to dodge death, so it comes back around to Ian, who is crushed by a falling sign. So Wendy, Kevin, and Julie are safe. For now. In August 2005, Sherry is released from the hospital stay that began with the yacht crash. But she's forced to wear a mask to cover her now disfigured face, and she thinks that her life is over. But like Eugene, she's unable to end it herself. She then receives a phone call from Death, or at the very least, someone posing as Death, who offers to make her a special deal. We've never seen Death be compromising or try to make a deal with any of the victims in the series, so I think it stands to reason that this caller is an imposter. They meet at a cafe where he appears as an elderly black man. He asks her to help get rid of the survivors that should have drowned that day. In exchange for that, he would restore her face. Not only has Death not taken a human form before, but it's never really needed help killing anyone. A fellow model named Chablis is eaten away by spilled chemicals. Shiraz's scalp is torn off and her head is twisted around on a music video set. Chardonnay hits her head and drowns in a hot tub. Rosé's organs are vacuumed in a botched liposuction surgery. Sherry's boyfriend Brute is run over by a subway train after falling into a manhole, and a photographer named Gunter was crushed after being pinned by the loading platform of a delivery truck. For each of these deaths, Sherry has either played a hand or watched idly as they happen. But she can't bring herself to kill her best friend, Cabernet. And because of this, she's broken the deal. Cabernet is also pregnant, and the delivery of her child may be what saves her. Remember the clue.
Only new life can defeat death. But the introduction of life that was not meant to be, that consolidate the list. Force death to start anew.
We've only seen the new life can defeat death cheat used successfully for people who were revived, but back in Final Destination 2, Kimberly's original understanding of this clue was that if someone who was supposed to have died creates new life by giving birth, they could essentially be off the hook. Anyways, after publicly screaming about her deal with death, Sherry is admitted to a psych ward. In November, Wendy and Kevin are now in college, and Julie meets both of them by chance on a subway, when Wendy has another vision. This time she sees their train crashing, but unlike the roller coaster, they aren't able to get off. We don't see what happens after this, but there is a possibility that some of them survived, since every other vision in the series has resulted in at least one person being saved. So it stands to reason that these visions are always a clue about how to avoid the hand of death. During the 6 months that follow, Sherry gets better and even goes through a facial reconstruction program. On May 13th, 2006, Sherry is crossing a street to meet up with Cabernet when she receives a phone call. The caller ID simply says death, and Sherry is struck down by a bus. As you can probably tell, Death seems to be a gearhead of some kind and he loves vehicular accidents, just freaking adores them. So in 2009, the most vehicle-oriented disaster of them all would occur. The Megatech 300 would be held at McKinley Speedway, where guy, we don't really know what he does, named Nick O'Bannon would experience his own Flight 180 phenomenon. He envisions a huge pileup where race cars crash and tumble into the stands, taking out many fans. So he pulls his friends away from the action, and in doing so, he inadvertently starts a fight and is chased out of the stadium by several people. Their lives are saved when his vision comes true, but Death gets to work quickly. A woman named Nadia is obliterated by a flying tire, Carter Daniels is dragged down the street and lit on fire by his leaking truck, Samantha is shot in the eye when a lawnmower ejects a rock, and Andy is diced by a fence. Nearby, there's kind of a side disaster that happens when an out-of-control truck crashes into a coffee shop and runs over 3 McKinley High School students. Nick's friend Janet is able to avoid Death's first attack at the car wash, but their friend Hunt is not so lucky, as he's drowned and sucked into a pool drain. A man named Jonathan Groves is crushed by a bathtub that falls through from a floor above at the hospital, just like Renoka from Final Destination End of the Line, and a security guard named George is hit by an ambulance, just like seemingly half of the population in this franchise being killed by vehicles. The remaining 3 are Nick, his girlfriend Lori, and their friend Janet. Nick has a new vision which leads him to save the girls from an exploding movie theater, so Death goes back to one of its most reliable methods and hits them with a truck. At the time of making this video, this is the last major death to occur. So by going through literally everything, all 1,458 confirmed kills, and that's not including Carly, we've learned a lot about the rules and tendencies of death. But like the actual concept of death in real life, there are still some things that we'll never understand. However, in looking at the bigger picture, we can get a better idea of how this all works. Here's what I've gathered. Death is unstoppable. The only way you may be able to avoid it is with the introduction of new life that was never meant to be. But since we never see any of the characters who tried this later down the line, we can't say with 100% certainty that this works. So you can't avoid it, but you can put it off. But if you do cheat death, don't expect it to last long. The only one who survived for an extended period was Clear, and she did so by locking herself away and not really interacting with anyone, thus not doing anything to change the course of history in a major way. The best comparison I can make to the nature of the Flight 180 phenomenon is Stephen King's 11/22/63. That story involves a teacher named Jake Epping, who goes back in time to try to prevent the assassination of John F. Kennedy, but he also tries to fix other things while he's in the past, which he believes will make the world a better place in the present. But whenever he tries to change history, the universe fights back and corrects whatever he does, and this makes it very difficult for him to change a major historical event like a presidential assassination. So in essence, he's able to change little details, but things just get smoothed over and eventually go unnoticed. He can't do much to change the destiny of the universe, and I think this is basically how it goes in Final Destination. If you have a vision about the future, you may be able to save yourself for the time being, but before long, death will correct your actions, and you will be the one to pay the price for it. Click the video on the left to see my analysis of other Final Destination characters, and if you love horror, remember to subscribe to CZ's World for new horrors every week. Ring the death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one, assuming we both survive. If you want to beat death, use a face mask and
honestly, I can't blame us for that either, because the ocean is just straight up nightmare fuel. But speaking of that nightmare fuel, that's today's topic. Out in the open ocean, a doctorate student is being sent there on a fishing trawler in order to capture information on the patterns of the faunal creatures of the ocean. Why would anyone choose this? I'm sure I don't know, because even in the biology world, marine biologists are considered fairly unique. Anyways, as they begin hopefully not their doomed adventure, as everyone remarks it's bad luck to bring a redhead on board, it's off to a great start, their boat eventually gets grabbed by something unseen below the surface. Eventually it becomes clear it's capable of infecting the crewmates, changing their behavior before ultimately leading to a grisly fate. So in today's episode, we will talk about what the parasite does to the human body, why it chooses what it does concerning infection sites, and where this thing even came from. All right, so for all those new here, because actually I think I've recovered from what I would call a dark suspension, because if you use those two words and then find their synonyms on YouTube, you'll know what I'm saying. And because of that, if you would like to check if you are still subscribed to the channel, because after going through that shadow period, I'll tell you, man, this channel got kicked in the crotch. Anyways, up on screen, you'll see a timestamp. If you want to bypass the summary and go straight into the discussion of Parasite, there. For all others, let's talk about sea fever. I believe there's horrible things in the ocean, and that was pretty bad. But, well, we'll start off our story with me feeling really bad for the people who made this movie. Dust appears to have backed it, and A, the movie itself was actually pretty good. B, they had a release date of April 2020, right after the whole planet shut down, so talk about bad luck and timing, but it appears that this was supposed to be some sort of like viewing event, like documentary style or something. Either way, they got screwed to the wall on release of this, so poor Scots. Anyhow, we see my absolute nightmare being in the water with dark water below and someone falling in. Bro, no thanks. A woman falls in and we get some random footage of Midarians. As a group in what appears to be a well-funded lab, which I have to ask, where is this sort of like backed laboratory? Because last I recall, marine biologists are typically working out of boxes with most basic tools. Because even me, as a microbiologist, they gave us just a couple of sticks and a rock to figure out what certain microbes were ransacking people's guts, and we had to share the rock. But a professor walks in and asks Siobhan why she's not hanging out with the rest of the nerds behind her. She says that she doesn't do hangouts. So I just break off for a second. Let me hit you with a bit of knowledge. If you are amongst your peers as a scientist and you can't find common ground in which to build any friendship with them, you're probably a bit of a douche canoe. Just saying. I've met some people like that in the lab, and they are really just a nice bit of sand and gravel thrown into a well-functioning machine. Complaining aside, the professor tells her she needs to wrap up her doctorate by going into the field and gathering evidence of her claims. She says that she can just do that from the computer, but he reminds her that if she doesn't, she's going to fail out of her doctorate, and there's really nothing we can do to help her. As she gets on the boat, we see that her social skills are a bit subpar, but can I blame her? No, I can't, because it's not like I'm really undefeated in the social parking lot. We also see that she's a little apprehensive about getting on the boat, and she may be a bit freaked out by the ocean. Actually, it's common for people to go into fields that scare them to learn about what they are afraid of. For instance, I'm a bit of a hypochondriac, yet I chose to go in the field of diseases. Pretty interesting how the human brain works, isn't it? And we now meet Gerard and Freya, who own and sail the boat. Mead is an engineer down below deck, and Sudi is the other guy helping. Freya asks Siobhan what she's supposed to do there, and she's looking for anomalies in their catch to develop an algorithm to predict logical outcomes. But also she has to do a dive in the open ocean, which can be nope. But we see some info that apparently fishermen don't learn to swim, as it's better to go quick rather than slow. So I guess story time, there's a concept of human hope, and it's pretty profound. There's a story about a ship full of sailors that went down. I can't remember if it was like World War II or not, but they all got separated out. Some of them knew help was coming and others had no clue. As they drifted apart, those that apparently didn't know drowned in a few hours. Those who did know that help was actually on the way were able to swim for just about 16 hours until finally being rescued.
I don't know why they
learn
gave
to
me
swim.
this. This thing is
If you're
busted.
able to call for help, you'll be able to push yourself.
All I
Going
need to
fast
do
is
this
not the
one
vibe.
is get
The
a
sea
bunch
then
of
takes off
damage.
her hat. We also see that she's a redhead, which if I remember correctly, like the
Should
whole
lock
crew, like,
shops,
oh
idiot.
god. But the superstitions among sailors was that it was bad luck to bring women in general on board the boat. But their captain is also a woman, so who cares about redheads? I mean, you can't just pick and choose your superstitions, man. Sudi is having a bro moment about this, but Johnny is interested in Siobhan, so he really doesn't care. But he does tell her to put her hat back on, so now they're heading off to go make some
You
bank.
hear
Siobhan is
how
shown the
broken
bunk
this is?
room
I did
full
pause
of
stretch
things
'cause I
working
knew this would be
shifts,
so
2 hours
easy.
of sleep, which concerns her because, scientists. She says that'll affect their brain,
Real
cause
cakewalk.
emotional outbursts,
Real
and can
cakewalk.
even lead to psychosis. To which Johnny says, yeah, I know, it's great. That also just sounds like a regular Tuesday at my house. He refers to it, though, as sea fever, and
end your life in a
there's the
second.
title. As Freya and Jared check the fishing report, apparently there's a ton out there. Meanwhile, back down to the ship, Siobhan puts her foot in her mouth, as you do, with Omid, as she compliments his work on the engineering of the boat
You're split.
and asks why doesn't he
You're
have a better
gone.
job. There's that socialization ability just shining through. He says that he's looking, he just
Pushing my
hasn't had the right
scapegoat.
opportunity yet
You're
to get
gone.
promoted to get another engineering job. Freya calls back to the Coast Guard. They see there's
Oh, you
some
wanna be
bushes
next? You wanna be next?
ferns, and
You're
that's where
gone.
their fish are smack in the middle of. Freya tries
Oh,
to sneak
you're
by
gone.
the Coast Guard, say, oh, we'll just go through it and not fish. Promise. But that gets shut down as whales and
You're
crabs are all
gone.
over the place, so they are banned from even entering the area. So I wonder what will happen. She agrees to go around it, but Jared has other ideas. That night, as they continue on their voyage, Siobhan goes to sit in the dining area to work, and even is being offered the chance to sit with everybody, but she instead says no, and goes and sits in bed alone. She's on that Sigma female grind set. We now get the montage of her working outside at night, collecting info,